Hi, I'm Owen Canfield with the Oklahoman, joined in studio today by State Senator Kyle Loveless of Oklahoma City. Kyle, thank you for coming in today to spend a few minutes with us.
Bet.
We're here to talk about the American Indian Cultural Center and Museum, which has been a point of some contention for the last really 2 or 3 years at the legislature, all 3 of your years at the legislature.
That's correct.
You're wrapping up your 3rd year as a state senator, and all the time you've been there, this thing has sort of been on high center, what to do. Give us just a little bit of background about the AICCM and your sort of evolution on how you came to become sort of a supporter of this.
Well, when I first started and became the senator-elect, I realized real quickly that my district lied the biggest unfinished project of construction in the state, state agency-wise. So I basically went down to the agency and went down to the museum site, spent literally hours, went on tours, participated in things, and actually found out about the scope of it and saw how big it is. And it kind of opened my eyes a little bit to, we can't as a state leave this asset just half done. And so that's kind of where I got into, I think we needed to finish it and finish it properly, and I think this bill that we passed helps get us there.
Well, that takes me to the next point, which is the piece of legislation the governor signed last week, came out in the last week of the session after a lot of back and forth, a very contentious issue. And what it does essentially is the state will spend $25 million in bonds to help complete it. That'll be matched with at least $40 million in outside money that has already been secured. And then the building will be turned over it has been turned over to Oklahoma City for the city to now decide how to go forward. What is your take on that resolution? Do you like it?
Well, in my opinion, if you would, when I walked in the door as a state senator 3 years ago, if you would have said, we are going to fund it at less than what they asked for, we're going to give it to Oklahoma City, and we're going to get it off the state's plate, basically, then you probably would have had a big problem then. But I think this year, everything kind of coalesced together in the sense of this seemed to be a resolution, an end to the story of the state. Now, I've been in favor of getting it open as a cultural center that can be used. But one thing that people don't realize is there's 200 acres over there. That's state property. Well, because of the bill, once they come to an agreement, the city and the state, then the 14 acres of the actual footprint of the museum will be built in the museum, but the rest of it will be developed for hotels.
The city can develop
The city can develop then at that point, because currently they can't. And that way, that aspect of it economically will be a boom for Oklahoma City.
So the thought is, let the city have the remaining land over there, allow them to develop it, as you said, and the revenue generated from that will be a win for the city, along with any revenue generated from the cultural center.
That's right.
Is that it?
That's right. And so I think we took a lot of the critics' points of they didn't want the long-term costs on the state of the 50, 60, 75 new state employees. They didn't want them to be state employees, so because that's who's going to run the museum. Well, basically, we're going to switch it over to a trust, which would then be run by the city. Those people would be employed there and not on the state.
Have you had a chance to talk to many city officials about this bill as it sort of unfolded? The city manager seemed to be a little bit less than thrilled as it came out because of, I'm not sure he was involved in much of the discussion, and all of a sudden here it is, hey, we're going to get rid of it, and oh, by the way, it's going to be yours to take if you want it. So there was some reticence there on the part of the city. Have you talked to any city folks, and what's it been?
I've talked both to the mayor and the city councilwoman of my area, and I've found, people that have taken that and have kind of been a little shocked by it, but you have to realize, both as a city and the city of Oklahoma City's Chamber of Commerce, finishing the cultural center has been on their legislative agenda items for a decade. And so they want to see this finished. We just have to make sure, both as citizens of Oklahoma City and as the state, that it all makes sense. So basically, Preston Dorflinger and OMS, Management of Enterprise Services, and the City of Oklahoma City have already started discussing the particulars. I believe that they'll realize, studies have shown the economic impact of the whole center is going to be about $3.8 billion over 20 years. So it's going to be a win-win for both the city and the state. And so I think the city hasn't been prepared to say we're going to run it, but they want to see it finished. So I think now the conversation has changed a little bit to where they're going to be in charge of actually running it, well, that changes the dynamic a little bit.
Sure.
So I think they look at the numbers. You know, 250,000 cars drive by there every day.
Right.
What kind of cultural tourists it will draw.
We're talking about, by the way, we're talking for folks who may not be as familiar, we're talking about basically the intersection of I-40 and I-35.
That's right.
Along the south bank of the Oklahoma River.
And I think that once the city goes through that process of making sure, I think they have until the end of December to make this an agreement. I believe that the city realizes that they've got $40 million in non-state money raised and commitments that's just waiting there to be used. If the city were to just say, no, we don't want it, and they want the property back, basically they have no way of finishing the project.
Right.
So this gives them an ability to do so. And so I think that the city will have to come to that decision and work on it on their own. But I think that at the end of the day, they're going to do that.
Let me ask you, worst case, let's say the city studies it and says, you know what, guys, appreciate it, but we're not interested.
Yeah.
And what, does it just...
Then the status quo goes back to what it was, which
Right.
is we pay about $5.5 to $6 million every year for it to be unfinished.
Right, to pay off the bond,
to pay off the previous bond,
indebtedness
and then the current maintenance.
Right.
And so the state would still continue that. And I think I think that was what Speaker Hickman determined, which is that the status quo was not acceptable. Right. He didn't want to be the 12th speaker that had to deal with this issue. He wanted to get it off the state's plate, and I think that this package actually does that.
Well, State Senator Kyle Loveless, we really appreciate you coming in to talk a little bit about this today, and come by anytime.
Anytime, thanks.
Thank you, sir.